Welcome to the Past in Pictures channel. Be sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss out on more videos like this one. The photo shows a group of people from the Subcarpathian Russia region arriving at a screening area in Europe in May 1944, during a time marked by persecution and forced displacement. They wait for processing by local authorities in a scene recorded in several historical archives. Wedding rings collected by United States Army soldiers in 1945, found near a prisoner camp in Europe. The rings had belonged to people who had been held at the site during the period of the regime that controlled the region. George Blind, a member of the French resistance, looks at German soldiers with a steady smile in 1944. The photo became a rare symbol of courage in a time of intense tension. His expression reveals human strength even in extreme situations. During an event in Hamburg in 1936, one man kept his arms crossed while everyone around him followed the official gesture of the regime. The image became a symbol of individuality and quiet resistance. A single stance has carried decades of historical interpretation. The Hindenburg airship, the largest craft of its kind at the time, was preparing to land at Lakehurst when a failure caused a sudden fire. The images became a symbol of the end of the era of giant airships. The disaster led the world to abandon that form of travel and pushed future advances in aviation. The image shows the destruction left by the San Francisco earthquake on April 18, 1906, when a powerful shock hit the city shortly after 5 in the morning. The photo reveals Victorian houses badly damaged on Howard Street near 17th Avenue. A young girl holds her doll as she sits among the ruins of her own home, hit during the attacks on London in 1940. The scene shows how destruction affected everyday family life in that time. The photograph became a symbolic record of civilian resilience amid the hardships of the era. The signed photo shows First Lady Rosalind Carter next to John Wayne Gacy in 1978, before his name appeared in a widely reported criminal case in the country. The meeting took place during a public event when he was still seen as an active community volunteer. The image records a gathering at Stone Mountain, Georgia in 1915 during the reorganization of an extremist group that marked part of United States history. The movement grew in the 1920s and lost strength after scandals involving its leadership. The photo shows the inside of the White House completely stripped during its major rebuilding in the late 1940s. The interior structure was removed for reinforcement, leaving only the outer walls standing. This deep renovation ensured the safety of the building and marked one of the most dramatic periods in the history of the presidential residence. In 1938, England, a woman pushes a baby carriage designed for protection against chemical agents, reflecting the feeling of uncertainty before the war. These unusual devices came from efforts to increase civilian safety. They look odd today, but they were part of the technology of that period. An Armenian woman of 106 years old stands in front of her home in 1990, holding an old rifle she kept as a symbol of protection. The photo reflects the strength of a long life marked by conflict, displacement, and resilience. It is a striking portrait of memory and identity. At 19 years old, David Isom entered a segregated swimming pool in Florida on June 8, 1958, a simple act that exposed the racial inequality still enforced in public spaces. His presence there led authorities to close the pool that same day. The photo became a powerful record of the fight for civil rights in the American South. In this 1962 photo, two performers in elaborate costumes are detained by a police officer during the National Variety Artists' Exotic Carnival and Ball in New York, under charges linked to the clothing rules of the time. The scene reflects the social and legal limits placed on certain artistic expressions in that period. The image shows women being detained in Chicago in 1922 for wearing one-piece bathing suits without the leg coverage required by the rules of the time. Inspections were common on beaches and in parks where officers measured the length of clothing. The scene reveals how social norms and laws on women's dress were strict in the early 20th century. The photo shows Johnny and Robert posing for a portrait in the United States in 1922. Johnny was born without the lower half of his torso, a condition that shaped his life from an early age, but did not keep him from appearing in public records of the time. The image preserves a rare moment of American social history, showing friendship and everyday life. A mother covers her face in Chicago in 1948 after being photographed amid the financial struggles that marked the post-war years. The image reveals the hard reality of many families who faced economic instability. It became a powerful document about social inequality. The photo shows a young woman during the Great Depression in the 1930s, a period marked by deep poverty and instability in the United States. Many families faced unemployment and lived in makeshift conditions. The image became a symbolic portrait of daily resilience during one of the largest economic crises in history. The image shows Josie and Bertha, both 6 years old, and Sophie, 10, working at the Maggioni Canning Company in South Carolina around 1911. Children were often employed for long shifts, especially in seasonal industries. The famous photo Into the Jaws of Death, taken by Robert F. Sargent in 1944, shows landing craft moving through waves during the Allied operation in Normandy. The image captures the extreme challenge faced by the troops as they neared the French coast. The photograph shows 2 Allied soldiers during the Second World War holding artillery shells decorated with ironic messages, including a phrase aimed at enemy leaders written directly on the casing. Smiling at the camera, they turn a tense front-line moment into a bit of humor, used to ease daily pressure. The photo shows cows painted with white stripes during the Battle of Britain in the Second World War. The measure was used during nighttime blackouts when lights were dimmed to avoid air raids and visibility on the roads was poor. The bright markings helped drivers see the animals in the dark. The image is one of the very rare photos of the Supreme Court of the United States in session, taken in 1937. Because cameras were forbidden, photographer Eric Salomon hid his equipment inside a sling and recorded the moment discreetly. In 1943, in the middle of the hardships brought by the war, residents of Hornsey in London took part in an official campaign to recycle everyday materials. The effort encouraged collecting newspapers, cans, and glass that would be reused by industry to support the war effort. Protesters marched through the streets of Harlem in 1967, combining calls for racial equality with opposition to the conflict in Southeast Asia. The demonstration reflected the growing strength of peace and civil rights movements in the United States. The scene became a powerful record of the social mobilization of the time. The photo shows Times Square filled by a huge crowd on Victory over Japan Day, August 15, 1945. Thousands celebrated the end of the Second World War in one of the biggest public celebrations the city had ever seen. It is a striking record of relief and hope after years of global conflict. During Victory over Japan Day, celebrations on August 14, 1945, a sailor and a nurse were photographed in a spontaneous embrace in Times Square. The image by Alfred Eisenstadt became a symbol of the end of the war and the shared joy of that day. The photo taken by Louis Daguerre in 1839 on the Boulevard du Temple in Paris is the first known record of human beings. The long exposure time captured only a shoe shiner and his client, while other passers-by did not appear. Albert Einstein's desk remains untouched in his Princeton office on the very day of his death, April 18, 1955. Filled with papers, notes, and stacked books, it reflects the routine of a scientist who worked until his final moments. The image became a historic record of the mind that shaped modern physics. During the final stages of work on the Eiffel Tower, painters worked in narrow, high places that required skill and courage. The image shows a worker supported only by one arm and one leg on the outside of the metal structure in a time before modern safety equipment. Known as Lunch Atop a Skyscraper and taken in 1932, the photo shows workers eating lunch while seated on a suspended beam during the construction of Rockefeller Center in New York City. The image symbolizes the city's rapid growth and the risky work that raised its skyscrapers. It became one of the most famous records of the era of vertical building in the United States. The Titanic appears still in the Harland and Wolff shipyards in Belfast during its assembly phase in 1910. The huge structure required scaffolding, cranes, and thousands of specialized workers. This stage marked the building of one of the most advanced and ambitious ships of the early 20th century. Young newsboy Ned Parfit holds the evening paper announcing the fate of the Titanic on April 16, 1912. The image captures the urgency of printed news in the heart of London. It became one of the most emblematic records of the immediate shock the sinking caused worldwide. The photo shows the Statue of Liberty still under construction in France, with its structure assembled in Paris before being shipped to the United States. The parts were tested one by one to ensure stability and a precise fit. This process marked the decisive phase that would turn the sculpture into a future international symbol of welcome and freedom. The first known aerial photograph, taken by James Wallace Black in 1860 from a hot air balloon above Boston. The equipment was still rudimentary, and the shot required great precision in mid-air. This pioneering experiment launched aerial photography, opening the way for maps, urban studies, and new ways to document cities from above. This image shows the first airmail flight carried out in the Western world in the early 20th century. A small airplane carries bags of letters, marking the shift of postal service from the ground to the sky. The experiment opened the way for faster delivery networks between cities and countries. The photo records the beginning of a new era in communication. The Willamette meteorite, the largest ever found in the United States and one of the most famous in the world. Discovered in Oregon, it weighs about 17 tons and bears marks shaped by thousands of years of erosion. Today, it is a centerpiece in studies of the origin and journey of large meteorites that have reached Earth. The United States ship Langley appears in 1928 as the first aircraft carrier of the United States Navy, converted from an old coal cargo ship. Its role was to test airplane takeoffs and landings at sea. This experiment opened the way for the large carriers that would become central to modern fleets. The photo shows the old Fiat factory in Turin, famous for having a test track built directly on its roof. There, cars completed laps and were evaluated before going out on the streets. The building and track still exist but are no longer used for testing, remaining as a unique landmark of Italian industrial engineering. The photo shows Marine Sergeant Frank Prater caring for a 2-week-old orphaned kitten during the Korean War in 1952. The scene drew attention for revealing a moment of care in a military setting. The image became one of the best known of the time, remembered as a symbol of humanity in hard situations. Francis Green, Margaret Peg Kirchner, Ann Waldner, and Blanche Osborne, members of the United States Air Force pilot program during the Second World War. They appear stepping down from their aircraft after a transport and training mission. Elizabeth L. Gardner of Rockford, Illinois, a pilot in the Women Air Force Service Pilots program during the 1940s. The WASP flyers tested aircraft, transported equipment, and supported operations of the United States Army Air Forces. Gardner became one of the best-known faces of the group, symbolizing the crucial contribution of women to military aviation at the time. The photo shows 5-year-old Warren Bernard running into the arms of his father, a soldier from New Westminster about to leave to serve Canada in the Second World War. The scene captures an intimate moment amid the farewells that many families faced in that period. The image became a symbol of the link between military duty and family affection. Italian immigrants disembarking at Ellis Island in 1905 during the large wave of migration to the United States. Many were seeking new opportunities after economic and social crises in Europe. The captured moment represents the beginning of the integration of thousands of families into American life. A group of Italian immigrants waits in the railroad waiting room at Ellis Island in 1905, when thousands of new arrivals spent long hours there before traveling on through the country. The scene reflects the beginning of life for many families seeking new opportunities in the United States. An elderly man holds a sign reading, "Happiness is," During the Poor People's Campaign in Washington District of Columbia in 1968, the movement brought together people from many regions of the United States to call for economic justice. The photo by Jill Friedman reflects the feeling of hope and protest that marked the camp known as Resurrection City. An Austrian boy shows pure happiness as he receives a new pair of shoes during the Second World War. The image reveals how small gestures could transform everyday life for children in that hard time. It became one of the most moving records of the era. In 1956, animals began to be used as therapeutic support in hospitals, long before the practice became common. The image shows one of the earliest records of this kind of complementary care. It was a curious and pioneering step in the link between health and emotional well-being. Disneyland employees take a break in their staff cafeteria in 1961. The photo reveals the behind-the-scenes of the park in its early years, when everything was still taking shape. It is a rare look at the daily life of the people who kept the magic running. The huge crowd recorded at Woodstock in 1969 shows the cultural scale of that historic festival. The gathering became a landmark of the music, art, and youth of the time. The photo captures the spirit of a moment that redefined generations. Elvis Presley appears in his military routine in 1958 when he served officially in the United States Army. The photo records a period that shaped his public image and took him away from the stage for a time. Even far from music, he continued to draw the world's attention. Charlie Chaplin appears at 27 years old in 1916, already recognized for his talent, but still at the start of his worldwide fame. The image captures the phase when his film style was taking shape. It is a rare moment of the artist before he reached his final status as an icon. Charlie Chaplin meets American deafblind writer Helen Keller in 1919 during a visit that brought together two of the most admired figures of their time. The encounter shows the mutual respect between the artist and the activist, who was already known for her work in education and inclusion. At 75 years old, Helen Keller appears doing simple tasks in the kitchen in an image that highlights her independence and everyday routine. Known worldwide for defending the rights of people with disabilities, she lost her sight and hearing as a baby, but built a life of lasting impact. Albert Einstein visited Lincoln University after learning that it had become the first university in the United States to offer undergraduate degrees to Black students. During the visit, he spoke about equality and education, reaffirming the importance of access to knowledge for all. Taken in the summer of 1939 at Nassau Point, Long Island, this rare portrait shows Albert Einstein in a simple moment by the sea, far from laboratories and scientific debates. The photo appears just months before he warned the United States government about nuclear advances in Europe, a step that would change the course of global research. The photo shows Nikola Tesla working beside his huge magnifying transmitter in Colorado Springs during his high-voltage experiments. This period marked important advances in the study of wireless power transmission. The image became one of the most iconic records in the history of science. This is the look of one of Apple's early computers, a prototype created before the launch of the Macintosh that would transform the industry in 1984. Developed in 1981, it shows the experimental stage when the company tested new designs to make personal computers more intuitive. The image shows long lines forming in front of a movie theater in Ann Arbor, almost a month after the release of Jaws in 1975. The crowd reflects the immediate impact of the film, which reshaped the idea of the modern blockbuster. The photo records a time when audiences packed theaters again and again to see the hit that marked popular culture. The first Academy Award ceremony, held on May 16, 1929 at the Roosevelt Hotel, had only about 270 guests gathered at a simple banquet. The awards took a little more than 15 minutes, and the winners were already known before the event. This historic image shows the modest beginning of the ceremony that would become the most famous movie prize in the world. This 1961 photo, taken behind the scenes of Cleopatra, shows Elizabeth Taylor sitting on the lap of her then-husband, Eddie Fisher, while Richard Burton, her co-star, appears beside them. The casual moment hides a major chapter of popular culture. A few years later, in 1964, Elizabeth would end her marriage to Eddie and begin a relationship with Burton. Before achieving worldwide fame as Marilyn Monroe, Norma Jean Baker lived a simple life far from the spotlight. At 16, she married Jim Dougherty in 1942, when they both still imagined a shared future far from the movies. The photo shows Diana Spencer at 13 during the summer of 1974 at her mother's home in Scotland. Next to the pony souffle, she still appears far from the public life she would take on years later. This simple record became one of the rare images of Diana's youth before she became one of the best-known figures in the United Kingdom. After the Second World War, Christian Dior introduced his new look collection in 1947, marked by long skirts and wide volumes. Many women saw the style as a step backward and criticized the heavy use of fabric during a period of rationing. In 1910, Paris faced the Great Flood, the result of weeks of rain that made the River Seine overflow and turned entire streets into improvised canals. In this rare image, a resident watches from a balcony as the waters rise while boats replace carriages and daily life is forced to adapt. In 1921, the first Miss America pageant had a very different style from today, with contestants walking in bathing suits and sashes over their shoulders. The young woman shown second from the left, representing Washington District of Columbia, became the first winner. In 1967, Kathrine Switzer ran the Boston Marathon with BIB number 261, becoming the first woman to complete the race officially. During the course, organizers tried to pull her out, but she kept going with the support of other runners. Taken in 1888 in the Netherlands, this image shows the graves of a Catholic woman and her Protestant husband, separated by a wall that reflected the religious rules of the time. Even divided in death, the headstones were built so that the sculpted hands on top could remain joined. The record shows Salvador Dalí honoring Raquel Welch as he finishes the portrait that would become one of his best-known works of the 1960s. The image captures the meeting of film and surrealist art in a symbolic moment of popular culture. The scene became one of the most remembered behind-the-scenes episodes of both careers. In 1960, a relaxed scene shows Che Guevara and Fidel Castro on a fishing trip in Cuba during a rare break in their political schedules. The image shows the two men in an informal setting, far from the official stage that made them global figures. In December 1961, the Beatles were still almost unknown and performed for only 18 people at the Aldershot Club in England. Shortly afterward, the band would sign a record deal and begin the rise that turned them into a worldwide phenomenon. Three runners move along the road during the marathon of the first modern Olympic Games, held in 1896. The race took place on rough routes like this one, reflecting the early sporting spirit of the event. The image preserves a decisive moment in the Olympic revival at the end of the 19th century. On the first morning after Sweden switched to driving on the right in 1967, streets and drivers faced a scene of total reorganization. The so-called H-Day marked the biggest traffic change in the country in the 20th century. The photo records a unique moment of collective adjustment on a national scale. In 1920, an inspector measured bathing suits on public beaches to make sure they followed the rules of the time. Many women were warned for wearing styles seen as too short. The scene shows how clothing rules reflected social values very different from those of today. The photo shows Mary Anderson, one of the few women in leadership roles in the federal government in the early 1900s. As director of the Women's Bureau in the Department of Labor, she served for 25 years under 5 presidents. Anderson fought for equal pay and better conditions for women workers. The image of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, photographed by Ron Galella in 1971, became one of the best-known photos of the former First Lady. Galella, a pioneer of paparazzi photography, followed Jackie obsessively, which led to lawsuits and legal limits placed on him. The image shows a woman receiving a permanent wave, a popular 1930s technique used to create long-lasting curls. The equipment looked complex with many wires and heated metal rollers. This procedure marked a phase of major innovation in beauty salons when technology began to change women's hairstyling. The photo records a Chicago bar on December 5, 1933, when Prohibition was officially ended in the United States. The scene shows people marking the end of restrictions as drinks are again served legally. The moment symbolizes the close of an era marked by bans, smuggling, and deep changes in the country's social habits. A German coal miner stands after his work shift in 1958, covered in the coal dust that marked everyday life in the mines. The image shows the demanding conditions faced by workers in the industry at that time. The photo became a symbol of the industrial labor force that helped rebuild the country after the war. Ahmet Ali Çelikten is often named as one of the first black pilots in history, and possibly the very first. He served in the aviation arm of the Ottoman Empire during the First World War, at a time when there were very few pilots anywhere in the world. Bea Arthur, before her acting career, when she served in the Women's Reserve of the United States Marine Corps during the Second World War. She worked as a truck driver and typist, performing essential support duties. Years later, her work on screen would make her one of the best-known performers of her generation. A Red Cross nurse stands next to a dog trained to locate wounded soldiers during the First World War. These animals helped medical teams in rough terrain by indicating where people needed aid. The image highlights the cooperation between health professionals and rescue dogs. Flora Stewart is remembered for her vibrant personality and for having a memory considered exceptional. Her portraits were often described as striking, reflecting her strong and observant presence. The image preserves the identity of a woman whose personal story drew attention in her own time. Kiki Soblu, known as Princess Angeline, born around 1820 and daughter of Chief Seattle of the Duwamish people. She stayed on her land even after the forced removal of her community, living much of her life in Seattle. The portrait is one of the most important records of Native history in the region, preserving her identity and cultural legacy. The image shows Hans Langseth, a Norwegian-American immigrant known for having the longest beard ever recorded. When he died in Windermere, North Dakota, his beard measured about 17 feet 6 inches, becoming a unique milestone in the curious history of the 20th century. The photo shows Camberly Kate walking with several rescued dogs in England in 1962. She became known for never turning away an abandoned animal, devoting her entire life to their care. Over the years, she took in more than 600 dogs, becoming a symbol of compassion and animal protection. The image shows Frida Kahlo standing beside several of her self-portraits, works that defined her artistic identity. She explored physical pain, cultural roots, and personal stories with rare symbolic intensity. These portraits helped establish her as one of the most influential figures in Mexican and international art. German soldiers appear with dogs during maneuvers in northern Germany in the First World War. The animals were trained for patrol, messaging, and logistical support in rough terrain. The scene shows part of the military organization of the time and the essential role the dogs played in operations. The building appears in its monumental form only a few years after completion in 1880. For decades, it served as one of the busiest structures in the state. It was demolished in 1939 to make way for new urban projects, leaving only photographic records of the former landmark. The image of the Empire State Building in 1941 is striking because the skyscraper rises almost alone on the New York skyline. At the time, few buildings reached such heights, and the tower dominated the urban landscape. The photo shows a moment when the city was still growing upward quickly, before the arrival of the many tall buildings that surround it today.